All right, cool. Hey, everyone. How's it going? Today, we are going to briefly go over the fantasy basketball ramifications of the Andre Drummond news that broke early Monday morning about his eventual trade out of Cleveland. And we're also going to touch on the Anthony Davis injury update from, well, there isn't an update yet, but we're going to go over the potential ramifications of an absence for Anthony Davis, who re-aggravated his Achilles injury during last night's Lakers-Nuggets game. At the moment, we only know that he's getting an MRI in Minneapolis today, but we assume that an update will be coming at some point in the future. But for now, we're going to focus a little bit on most of our focus will be on Andre Drummond, Jarrett Allen, and the fallout with what's going to happen in Cleveland. If you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask in relation to your teams around these subjects, feel free to drop them in the comments section, and we'll try and hit those at the end of the show. So, first thing, if you haven't heard the news, early Monday morning, Shams Charania of The Athletic released his usual, weekly, bi-weekly piece that he puts out on The Athletic, where he touches on all the trade rumors that he's heard of. And the headliner for today's edition was that Andre Drummond was the focus of a trade talks between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Toronto Raptors. Shortly after that, Adrian Wojnarowski and Brian Windhorst of ESPN set up a joint report that Drummond was going to be held out of all future Cavaliers games going forward until a trade was completed, which obviously has monster ramifications for your fantasy teams and for the Cavs at large. For all intents and purposes, Andre Drummond is no longer a member of the Cavaliers. He has played his last game in Cleveland. Just before we get into the specifics, that's obviously huge for Jarrett Allen and his value going forward, and creates a lot of questions around Drummond. But to touch on the last bits of the report there, Wojnarowski not really refuting Shams so much as, it's like halfway towards refuting, said that there are no active talks at the moment. Shams never claimed that there was an imminent deal on the table that was about to go down between the Raptors and the Cavs, but according to Woj, there's nothing anywhere right now. The Cavaliers are in the very early stages of this, which obviously puts a lot of question marks on how long Drummond's going to be held out. The other aspect that's worth noting in this story is that part of why Drummond was pulled was, and this was cited in Shams' piece, was just a pattern of lack of effort and just disengagement that he's shown on the court, which if you've watched Cavaliers games since that trade's gone down, it's been apparent. The Cavaliers are currently on a 7-game losing streak. You have to have a feeling that, his presence is not doing great for team morale during that type of stretch right now. So both parties felt it was best to separate. So that's all the details on what we know right now. And let's talk about the Andre Drummond side of things first, because that's definitely going to be the most complicated. Because he's out. He's not playing basketball games anymore, and he has no timetable to return. And that phrase you're all very familiar with when in like the sense of injuries, where, you have a player who has surgery on, some limb, ligament, and it keeps them out for an extended period of time with reevaluation and so on and so forth along the way. But in this situation, the timeline could be as much as 5 weeks, which is when the NBA trade deadline is. I believe it's March 25th, so it's 5 weeks from today. For all we know, it could be next week. It could be later this week. Maybe he's traded. These deals can materialize out of nowhere. So the issue that people with Andre Drummond on their teams face is that you're not going to have this guy, and you have no idea when he's going to come back. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know how Yahoo and ESPN are going to handle these types of things, but chances are he's not going to be IR eligible because he's not injured. He's just going to be out. And assuming that's the case, you're just going to have a dude burning a hole on your roster doing nothing. And that's tricky. That's very tricky. So here's the thing. If you have Drummond on your team, my inclination is to hold on because you can't drop him, and you're not going to get anywhere near market value for him in a trade. People are going to be lowballing you out the wazoo. No one knows where he's going to be. No one knows how he's going to play. Now, presumably, once he gets traded, it's going to be a contending playoff team, And B, he's going to have a starting position where he's going to be backed up to his usual 30 to 32 minutes a night. And that amount of time, we know what kind of player Drummond can be for your squads. It's just that there's so much uncertainty, you're not going to get that fair market value. And then just to share some numbers on the season, Drummond is 81st overall ranked in 9 category leagues. Before the Jarrett Allen trade, where he was, starter unquestioned, he was playing about 32 minutes a game, and he was the 68th ranked player in 9 category leagues on averages of 19 points per game, about 15 rebounds, and a combination of roughly 3 defensive stats per game. Great stuff. It's still even below the mark that we anticipate for him in those types of roles, where in the past, in that kind of run, Drummond has been close to a top 50, 40 kind of player. And it's possible that he could become that type of player again in a new environment. But there's so many factors that you obviously can't assume that until you know where he's going. But that's the point. You can't drop a guy who has that amount of upside. And he is going to play again this season. It's that's the guarantee. He's not hurt. He's going to play. And even more so, Drummond's value has been depreciated a little bit too since Jarrett Allen's come into town. Drummond's been in a virtual timeshare with Allen, only averaging about 26 minutes per game. He's dropped all the way down to the 95th ranked player in 9 category leagues, which is taking his overall ranking on the season down to 81. So even if you luck out and you find someone who's willing to give you fair market value for Drummond, it's not even going to be at the level that we assume he'll be able to get to. So if you are in a position where you can afford to wait 5 weeks, and this is tough, not everyone can do this. Not everyone's able to do this, but if you have, if you're in a playoff setting and you feel like you're in the top 4 and you can manage to go a few weeks, you got to sit on Drummond because he'll be able to play during playoff time when that will really matter. And the type of situation where you might be forced to move off of him is if you've already got a team that's dealing with a ton of injuries. I mean, there's plenty of variables involved there. It's a team-to-team basis, but if you've already are hemorrhaging spots, having Drummond just burning a roster spot with no IR eligibility is going to be really tough to stomach. And if you're fighting for playoff contention and you're in a 12-team league and you're 10th right now, you might have to trade him. It might be that kind of situation where you just see what you can get. But frankly, if I can, I'm going to be searching for ways to hold on to him. And if you guys have specific questions about that, Drummond's on your team, maybe we can work through the specifics together on this show here. But that's kind of the deal with him. Again, trade deadline is March 25th. No guarantee that he's still in limbo to that point, but at this moment we're dealing with a bunch of nebulous information. It's a really tough position to be in if he's on your squad. So let's talk about Jarrett Allen. Much easier to get through and much more exciting. Allen is now the unquestioned starter in Cleveland, as was always the plans for the future. He was brought in to be their starting center. They showed a willingness right away to already put him on the same level with Drummond, which is probably why there was some of that discontent that Drummond felt from the onset, that, writing's not just on the wall, but it's in bold typeface that, yeah, you're out of here, man. Allen's in, though, and he's going to be playing probably 30 minutes a night, 32 minutes a night's where Drummond was at before the trade went down. There's no reason why Allen shouldn't get close to that range. And to me, I think that he could really have top 40 upside, honestly. I mean, that's in play. I'm not saying that's guaranteed, but you've never seen him with this kind of run before, and he's about to really he has no competition. He in starting time this year, Allen has averaged 15 points per game, 10 rebounds, about 2 assists, and close to 2 blocks. He's pretty easy to project for because he's such a per-minute producer. I mean, when you just take his season averages, both Cleveland and Brooklyn on the season, they're pretty close to those numbers too. 14 and 10 with about 2 blocks per game. His field goal percentage is sky high, and with more attempts, that's only going to continue to bolster itself. The free throw percent's not great. I mean, it's not bad by any means. 75% from the line over his last 2 seasons. It's definitely a noticeable uptick. He just takes a lot of them. So that's kind of the shakier aspect of his game. But he really does look like, kind of like your poor man's Clint Capella with better free throw percentage. So those two are very interesting players to compare. But if I'm looking at perhaps buying on Jarrett Allen, right now is the best time for this. He's been a top 60 player on the season overall. And I think that it's no doubt that he's going to clear that mark the rest of the way. If you can trade someone in the top 60 or top 50, close to that range for him, I'd do it. Particularly if you're trying to upgrade with similar stat sets, like you're trading out a guy who's a rebounds and shot blocking and field goal percent specialist. Jarrett Allen is going to be near top in the league in rebounds, blocks, and field goal percentage for fantasy purposes going forward. I feel very strongly about that. So great news for him. And great news for Cleveland too, because I think that it's better to start getting him acclimated to that full-time starter role now as they continue to build around Sexland and Isaac Okoro. Those four guys are a really good foundation for Cleveland to move with going forward. So I want to touch on the Anthony Davis stuff first, but a lot of the questions I'm seeing in the chat right now have to do around the Drummond, Jarrett Allen sort of side of things. So why don't we answer a couple questions real quick? We'll start right here from Tama. How much is too much to try to buy Allen? Would you do Boucher, Ayton, or John Collins? See, I would start lower. I think that, I know Ayton's been a little lower on the season, but he's got more name recognition to him. I think that, Jarrett Allen could finish close to those guys, but that's not where I would want to start. I would try and look towards centers in the 50s and 60 ranges, sort of the lower ends of that. Someone on Twitter actually gave me an interesting suggestion of Jonas Valanciunas as someone to float out there. I would still try and start negotiating lower on that, but I do like Jarrett Allen in this role for the rest of the season over Jonas Valanciunas. I do think that will ultimately be a successful swap. But, I think it's worth, while things are still fresh and maybe people who have Allen haven't caught on to exactly, how, and let's give credit to people. I think it's pretty obvious that a backup center going to a starting center role is going to accumulate more stats, but just the degree to which where I think Allen could be on the same level as those three guys that you just mentioned here, I don't know that's settled in. So I would start lower first, and I would anticipate that Allen is returning value close to where those guys would be. We'll get another question from Tama real quickly. He gave us right after that. If I assume Larry Nance, was dropped, how aggressively should you pick up and stash? Drop Joe Ingles or Warren for Larry Nance? So with Nance, this obviously is good. Yeah, that's another side of things that we should talk about too, because Cleveland has had a glut of big guys sort of crowding that front court for a while now. And Larry Nance has always been one of them. He and Kevin Love are still going to be coming back, and they're going to absorb a lot of that power forward time. But this does, I think, secure that Drummond's out of the picture entirely. This does create an avenue for Larry Nance, Kevin Love, and Jarrett Allen to all play enough to have fantasy value, because Larry Nance and Kevin Love can get themselves involved in some backup center capacity, because there's really no backup behind Allen. I think when this team's up to full strength, the plan would be to roll with Larry Nance and Kevin Love there more often. And Nance has been incredible this year without Love, and since before he went down with the wrist injury. I think that they are going to find the ways to continue to play Nance the way that they were. So yes, I am in favor of stashing Larry Nance. It depends on your situation, because it sounds like you're already stashing TJ Warren. Because I know we've got we're expecting an update on him sometime early this week on a timetable, whereas Larry Nance, I think, is a little more established. We expect him back within the month. Not this month. I think it might be early March or mid-March. Might be a little later. It might be. We're still a ways away from Nance, is what I'm saying. I would probably stash Nance. Preferably, I would stash him over Warren, I think. But I'm going to leave that to the discretion of where your team's strengths are. So if you are in a situation where, points, field goal percentage, just scoring stats and field goal percentage are more important to you, then Warren probably gets that edge, whereas Larry Nance has the edge with rebounds and steals. He's been leading the league in steals on a per-game basis, I'm pretty sure. That's probably not going to last, but it's pretty great stuff that he's definitely shown an aptitude to get a lot of. And if he's playing more center minutes too, the blocks come up too. I'm definitely high on Larry Nance as a result of this deal. continuing to find time to be of fantasy value. So I would look to stash him if possible. Moving on to Justin. Start. Well, that's not really. We're going to try and keep things on the show limited to just the Jarrett Allen, Andre Drummond, and eventually Anthony Davis notes as well. But I will happily get to you that question offline afterwards. Why don't we go to Andrew here asking, does a Drummond trade make Nance more appealing once he's healthy? Maybe he plays in 5. Yeah, I just touched on this. I do think that that's going to, as the roster is currently constructed, that would make a lot of sense to have Larry Nance and Kevin Love cobble together some center minutes. I do think just having Drummond out of the equation, if those 3 are your main front court guys, that is a very good situation to be in for Nance. And I think that they appreciate what he brings to the table enough to continue to find places for him to play. All right, so that's enough on those questions for now. If you guys have any more, feel free to drop them in the chat. I really briefly want to touch on Anthony Davis, which at this moment, as of 1:33 p.m. Eastern time, don't believe we've gotten an update on his MRI that he's receiving today. So it's a significant thing to make note of because Davis had been dealing with this Achilles soreness for the last 2 weeks or so. He had missed some time because of it. He'd been working with the Lakers medical staff, and he ultimately was able to get to the point where he felt good enough to play on Sunday. He told reporters that he felt no pain and that he was excited and ready to go. Ultimately, though, along the first half of last night's Lakers-Nuggets action, he re-aggravated the injury, swelled up, inflamed again, and he had to leave for the rest of the game. The fact that happened, that the Lakers have been working and monitoring the situation with Davis, they had cleared him, and then he immediately got hurt again, regardless of how severe the injury is. It might not be at all. It might just be continued it might just be a continued, rehabilitation. Maybe it's a 1 to 2 week timeline to clear it up. My guess is that the Lakers, who have nothing to lose right now, they are top in the league. Their record is secure. They are going to be a playoff team. They are going to be cautious with Davis on this injury. They do not want to risk him putting himself in a situation where he could make him put himself out of commission for the playoffs or just down the road. He is the future of that franchise and the present. So they have all the reason in the world to be as cautious as possible on this deal. So I think it's safe to assume, no matter what the MRI reveals, that Davis is going to miss maybe a couple of weeks here. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I would be surprised if my life goes that direction at some point from this point forward. But no, I'm not a doctor, so I don't understand the specifics. I can just assume, based off of what Davis means to the team and the fact that this was an injury that he re-aggravated after being cleared, the cautious approach is going to be the one that wins the day. So in a situation that Davis is missing a significant amount of time, Kyle Kuzma is going to jump into the starting lineup. He has been a shaky fantasy basketball player over the years, but he's been noticeably better this season, just like in a real life on court impact perspective. Like, he looks like he has taken a step forward. He's going to start. He's started, I believe, 6 games already this season in which he's sported averages about 14 points per game, 7 rebounds, 2 threes, and about a block. The first 3 sound sustainable. The defensive stats have always been hit or miss for him. He's definitely worth grabbing. If he's on your wire, I would grab him now. Just preemptively get it ahead of the news before it hits, because wherever we learn about Davis, he's going to miss at least some time. And in the worst case, Kuzma makes sense as a streamer. For him to be like a standard league level fantasy player, though, to be a top 100 player consistently, he's got to work on the percentages. His field goal percent and free throw percent are not that great. If he's playing perhaps big in some small lineups, maybe playing near the rim will help with his field goal percentage. But those percentages have always been off. The defensive stats have never been consistent. So you're really talking about a guy who's a much more friendly option in points leagues for sure. But in category leagues, he's going to have some roadblocks that he's going to have to overcome. He's going to have a big role, though, theoretically, on this team without Davis. I mean, we've seen it to a degree that he is trusted to be a contributor on offense. As far as anyone else on the Lakers roster that I can think of, I think that it's going to be a sort of piecing things together by committee after Kuzma. I mean, we'll see more Markieff Morris, certainly. We'll probably see LeBron play bigger and smaller lineups, maybe, which will free up more time for guys like Alex Caruso in Taylor Horton Tucker. Tucker popped off on the scene in the preseason, has a very fantasy-friendly game from what we can tell. And that's all predicated on his ability to get defensive stats, which he can do in enough playing time. He's a guy that I'd monitor going forward to watch some of these Lakers games and see what role is going to be available for him. I believe he hit close to 23, 24 minutes last night, but there was some garbage time factor in there as well. If he's playing about 25 minutes a night consistently, he has some deep league appeal, maybe even more. I mean, the defensive stats are real. He's a decent three-point shooter. He can get involved a little bit in the passing game. I mean, he's very 9-category friendly. So Kuzma's an ad. I'd say right now, you got someone you can cut. I'd just go ahead and do it and get in front of the news before it comes out. And Tucker is someone I'm putting on my watch list. So we're going to go a little bit now over towards some other questions that have popped up. And if you have questions about the AD side of things, feel free to drop those in. But we're going to go back, I guess, now to address a little bit more of the Andre Drummond, Jarrett Allen side of this conversation. So I apologize. I can't read your name, my man, but your question is an interesting one. JaVale McGee is the other center on this roster who I am. He's a trade candidate himself. He's not part of Cleveland's future plans. He is probably going to play right now. I don't have exactly what he did last night in front of me. If you guys could. I'll just look it up real quick because why not? JaVale McGee last night in about 16 minutes scored 9 points with 10 rebounds and a block. And look, there's some short-term appeal there as a streamer if that's what he's going to be hitting. 16 minutes a night. It's enough for McGee to do stuff. But long-term down the road, long-term down the road, it's going to be tough to project where he's going to go because he's very tradable. There's plenty of teams that would like his services, and there's no reason for Cleveland to hold on to him. So short-term stream now if you're interested in the stats that he provides. And yeah, it looked Greek to me. I missed that class in high school, so I don't. It's not my specialty, but I appreciate you tuning in and asking that question, man. I really do. Wayne next asks, what should voucher owners do with possible trade to Toronto? Will he still have value, and do we hold? Now, that's another interesting aspect of this conversation that I omitted in the initial conversation here. It's tough to make a plan for a player on a team who could potentially trade for this guy who might get traded down the road. There's some layers that we have to go through with Chris Boucher. I've called him Boucher a couple of times. He's Chris Boucher. That's his name. I know that. Look, I'm still holding on to him. I'm not trying to move off of him necessarily. The fact that Toronto is in this market and conversation in general is emblematic perhaps of their uneasiness with rolling with Boucher as their best center going forward. But the Andre Drummond trade to Toronto is by no means set in stone. If anything, I'd wager and say the fact that it's being made public this early on hurts the chances that it happens. You see that all the time with trade rumors. Like the old adage goes is once it's known, once it's a rumor and stated, that's all it is. Like it's not going to materialize now that it's seen in the public eye. And with Toronto specifically, when you try and do the math on how they make this trade work, the contracts don't really add up unless it's a much bigger trade on their part and they're trading one of their core guys, or there's a third team involved. As is, all of their role players, I don't really think you can cobble up enough contracts to match Drummond's $27 million contract. So, yes, I'm a little concerned about Boucher in that Toronto is exploring possibilities, but I'm not going to move off of him right now. I'm going to continue to hold. If there are stories that come out over the next month or so that show Toronto more engaged in the center market, then maybe we can have that conversation. But at this point, I don't think it's helpful to try and just preemptively move off of him when nothing is imminent and nothing ultimately may not be. So, great. Well, I appreciate all of the questions that y'all brought on today's show. As of 1:42, we still have no update on Anthony Davis, but continue to watch for that. If you appreciated this content here, Go ahead and please drop a like and subscribe to the HoopBall YouTube channel. We are doing pregame shows all 5 days a week. At this point, we're rolling that. We're perhaps getting into, we're looking at different ways to mix that up too, while giving you guys the instant fantasy basketball coverage you need before you go into every night's slate of games. We've got one tonight on Monday. I think that's Adam King's doing that show tonight. But then beyond that, we do instant reaction shows like this. Me and Adam on Friday night broke down the Mitchell Robinson injury as soon as it happened. We want to continue to keep doing that going forward and help y'all out. To get a perspective on these things right as they happen. So if you like any of that, please subscribe to the channel. You follow me on Twitter at Alan Soroki, where I like to hand out fantasy basketball advice, just like talking to y'all. It's a fun time. And of course, follow the HoopBall Fantasy Twitter page as well for instant breaking news with fantasy analysis. That's the key. You might find your fantasy news from other sources, but no one gets the analysis side out as quick as the HoopBall staff does. Awesome stuff over there. Check it out. Check out the YouTube page, and we'll see you guys later on this week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.